Howdy, y'all. I'm Kasey Uhlenhuth. I'm a program manager on the .NET and Visual Studio team at Microsoft. And if you couldn't tell from this lovely accent, I am not actually from here. Go figure. And so I'm actually from the beautiful state of Kentucky, but I work in Seattle now. But we have a little quiz. Can any of you figure out which of these 3 states, which I did put states, I didn't mix in other countries in here. These are all states in the United States. Which of these is Kentucky? So if you think it's number 1, raise your hand. All right, I think it's number 2. I think it's number 3. Ooh, number 3 won, but oh, sorry, it's actually number 2. Yeah! And the trick is, which people only know Kentucky by our fried chicken, and coincidentally, our state looks like a drumstick. And so that's how you know what Kentucky looks like. Anyways, back to the real talk. I'm here to talk to you about C# development inside of Visual Studio 2017, what's new, and what's new for the language as well. So I'll start by talking about what Roslyn is and why Visual Studio 2017 is an important release for our team. We'll talk about the huge investment that we've done into performance and reliability in Visual Studio. I'll spend the majority of the time in Visual Studio demoing, and I'll briefly touch upon what we're thinking of doing next in Visual Studio. So what is Roslyn? Roslyn is the code name for the project where we basically completely re-architected the C# and Visual Basic compiler from native code into managed code. And we basically did this for 2 reasons. The first was so that we could write new features faster. So this includes new language features. So if you'll notice in Visual Studio 2015, that released with C#6, and now 2 years later, we've already shipped C# 7 and C# 7.1. So we're able to write features so quickly that we can even now do point releases of languages. And it also allows us to write new IDE features. So every preview update of Visual Studio, you'll notice that we have a handful of new refactorings and code fixes in there because it's now really easy for us to write them. Not only is it easy for us to write them, but it's also easy for you to write them now too, because the other thing that we did when we made Roslyn was we put a whole open source API surface over the compiler so that anyone can write their own code-focused tool or technology. And so Bart is doing a session later today if you want to learn how to write one of these yourself. So for my team, Visual Studio 2017 is kind of monumental for us because it's the first Visual Studio since we released Roslyn. And so we've finally been able to, take advantage of all the stuff that we built to ship stuff to you as quickly as possible. So performance and reliability in Visual Studio. Number 1 customer feedback we get is make everything faster. So we hear you and we're working on it. So we now are constantly monitoring crash and hang rates, and so we have goals to have them and things like that. And then we also are working really hard to improve performance for large solutions. So if you have a large solution and it's not working well with Visual Studio, email me or click the little send feedback guy in Visual Studio, and our team will actually work with you and your team to figure out what we can do to make your performance better. Because we found out that people do all sorts of things with their large solutions that we were not anticipating. And so we can only learn by reaching out to you guys and having you share stuff with us. So the things that we've done to save you time in Visual Studio 2017 is we moved a ton of our code analysis out of the main Visual Studio process. So you'll actually find in the task manager there's a service hub process, and that's where a lot of code analysis is getting done. So that will improve your typing latency. You'll never have typing latency from code analysis running. We have a thing called full solution analysis, which is now off by default. So full solution analysis basically crawls over your entire solution to see if a code change you made broke another file in your solution, which is great because if you make one code change, we'll let you know if you cause an error in another file. But if you have a huge solution, we're constantly crawling over that whole thing, so you might experience some performance issues with that. So now we turned it off by default. If you want it on, you'll have to actually go to Tools Options and turn this feature on. Solution load and the install experience I'll get to shortly. So 15.5, not sure if it released while I was over here for the preview of it. It might have, might not have, not up to date on it. But here's a little short video that will show how our solution load times have improved from 15.3 to 15.5. So this is opening the ORCID solution, which is about like 12 projects, I think. And so we got it from 24 seconds to 12 seconds. So we cut it in half in 2 updates. And so we're constantly working on getting this number even smaller now too. But you'll see that 15.3 is still loading until it finally hits 24 seconds. But now we've already, in 2 updates, decreased this in half. And so we're just continuing to chip away on making the performance of Visual Studio really fast for you all, so you can get to coding as quickly as possible. Also, how many of you have Visual Studio 2017 installed and are like using it? Oh, yes, almost everyone. Yay. So you already know this, so skip. All right. Let's go to Visual Studio. All right, so here I have, in honor of the country of bicycling, a little app that helps me track my bike workouts and tweet them because, you know, #life. Anyways, so it's a simple .NET Core library. You can tell it's .NET Core because instead of a references node, I have dependencies, and I can drill into this and see that I have the .NET Core SDK. And so the first thing I want to show is for .NET Core, we have now lightweight projects, is the way of thinking about it, where I can now have file globbing support. So I can take this file that I have right here, hairstyle, and pull it in, and then you'll notice in this Solution Explorer that this file was automatically added. And so what file globbing does is lets you always keep your Solution Explorer and File Explorer in sync. So if you're like, you know, using Git on the command line and pulling files in, you don't have to manually add them into the Solution Explorer to actually see those files. The other thing that we've done for lightweight projects is I can now right-click and immediately edit my CSproj file without having to unload my project and then reload it later. So, whew, that's a huge time saver. And you'll also notice I added that file, hairstyle CS, but there's no reference to it in the CSproj, which means less merge conflicts in the CSproj file. Whew, great. So, speaking of merge conflicts, those of you who have seen my code here are just sitting, staring at this error up here on the screen, which might be driving you nuts. And so, in honor of all of the awesome new refactorings, quick fixes we've added, I decided to start with this one, where we now, if you might have seen this in VS Code as well, will now help you actually resolve your merge conflicts by helping you choose which change you want to take, or both, with just using Control Dot to access the light bulb menu. Cool. All right. So now, a lot of people, let me undo this. So everything I'm now going to show you works for all project types for .NET. So it's not .NET Core specific. I just showed you the only .NET Core specific things, which were file globbing and the new CSproj. Everything else works for .NET Framework and .NET Core and standard projects. So let's look at live unit testing, which is an enterprise-only feature. Sorry, but hopefully you have enterprise. So the way that this works, let me full screen this. Come up here. So the way that a lot of us do unit testing today is we have this delicate balance between time and confidence. So we're like, what is the smallest number of tests I can run so I don't have to wait here for more than 5 seconds for my test to run, but also enough unit tests that I'm confident that I tested enough to actually make sure I didn't change or break anything with my code change. And so we're always like gambling a little bit with how many we're actually selecting. And so once we finally figure out what that subset of tests is that we want to run, we then have to manually click a button somewhere and then navigate to a code window to see the results of those running tests. And so what live unit testing tries to do is remove all of that manual labor and thinking out of the equation, and it just uses Roslyn to automatically figure out which tests are impacted by your code change, runs those tests for you, and then updates these icons in line in the editor to let you know the state of your tests. So red X means this line of code is hit by at least one failing test, and so you can click to see that, yeah, there's one failing test on this line. A green check means this is hit by all passing tests, and a blue dash means this line is not covered by any tests at all. And so when you click on one of these icons, you can actually double-click to navigate to the test directly. And so now that I'm in this test file, you'll notice these little beaker icons. So let's zoom in on those. And these are new if you are on the RTM version of Visual Studio. We added these later. This lets you know if a test is part of your live test set, is what we're calling it. And that's basically the set of tests that are running live always. So if you have a huge solution and you only ever work with one project and one unit test project, you can now scope it down so only those tests are running live. So if I go to Solution Explorer, for example, I can right-click on my test project and go to Live Unit Testing, and I can choose to include, exclude, or exclude everything but that project. Also, if you have one test that you know takes like a minute to run and it's really slow, you can exclude that specific test, doing the same thing by just right-clicking. And so I can exclude this test, and you'll notice now that the beaker is empty because it's not running in your live test set. So those are some cool things you can do there. So not totally sure why this test is failing, so we're just going to go ahead and start debugging it. So if I debug this, there's a ton of new debugging features that we've added in Visual Studio 2017. I am not the pro on all of them, but I'll show you my favorite one. I would highly recommend you look up Kasey Anderson. She also works at Microsoft on the debugging team, and she does a huge deep dive tips and tricks into all the different Visual Studio debugging tricks out there. Let's see. So, whoa, I've thrown an exception, and now I know I've thrown a null reference exception. And so this is the new exception helper where it tries to put the most pertinent information at the top level. So you can see here that here's the code that it threw on. And so today's workout could have been null, notes could have been null, or either one of those could have been null because I'm accessing the members off both of them. But this is letting me know specifically that notes is returning null, so I know exactly where to go investigate. And so, how many of you use productivity power tools? Oh yeah, all right, so you may have noticed we're slowly bringing in all those features into the box. And so one of them that we've just now added in Visual Studio 2017 15.3, I think it's 15.3, might be 15.4, is control click to go to definitions. Now I can hold control and then it will make everything into little links. And then I can go to definition. So if you're a mouse user, if you're in the middle of debugging, and you're just trying to quickly navigate somewhere, you can now hit control click and it'll take you there. So I know notes can be null, so another thing that we've added is this ability to add a null check with just pressing control dot. And so control dot, again, allows you to quickly access any quick fixes we have or refactorings that are available in that location. And so I can just quickly add my null check. And for those of you who are C# fans, which should be all of you, this is the C#7 throw expression that we're using here, and then C#6 name of. Cool. So you've also may have noticed, as I was adding that null check, that all of my little icons in here are now green, because I figured out which tests to run for me, and then ran them, and now lets me know all my code is passing. And so that's the value of live unit testing, where you can just edit code, and without you having to go anywhere, you now know that you're passing. And so you may have noticed me do this little navigation thing that I didn't really explain. So this is Control T. It's been called navigate to, or it's control comma, but we found that not a lot of people knew about it, and they really wanted this feature, and we're like, oh, we've had it forever. So we rebranded it as go to all. And you can access it with Control T or Control comma, and it allows you to quickly navigate to any file, type, member, or symbol declaration from a single location. And so we have all these little icons at the top to help you filter by those if you want. And you can also use the little syntax to just do it. So I know I'm looking for a file called distance workout. We have camel case matching, so I can just quickly navigate there. Let me put this on a new line. So I added that hairstyle class for a reason, which had an enum in it called hairstyle, because I want to see if I go faster, if I can bike faster or run faster, depending on my hairdo of the day. Let's say improving my aerodynamics, if you will. So I know that's really bad. I'm sorry. Uh, so you'll notice as I'm typing, as I'm going to add this parameter to my constructor, that IntelliSense looks a little different in Visual Studio 2017, and that's we've added this icon tray across the bottom, and you'll also notice that we bold what your search term was in the list, so you know why things are suggested to you. And so I can basically filter however I want, so I know I'm looking for enums, so if I filter, I only see enums. If you hate extension methods, which apparently a lot of people do, you can like deselect them, so you never see extension methods in there. So now your wildest dreams can come true with that. And so now, as I do this, you'll notice we also now have smart variable naming, where as I'm typing, we're now going to be like, hey, you probably want to name this hairstyle or hair or style. And so we're just basically taking the name of the type and splitting it into its substrings to figure out what you want to name it. And so, sure, good enough. And then I'm just pressing Control Dot to create and initialize this property. And then I have it. So now that I added this parameter to my constructor, I now need to actually update my references to it so that I have that there. So I'm just going to find all references. And you'll notice that find all references is totally different in Visual Studio 2017 than in 2015, where we've now used Roslyn to actually figure out what you have in here so that we can colorize it for you. And so rather than being a plain text output, we now have all the syntax colorization in here that you get when you're in your actual code file. We also have been told that we need a hierarchy in here. So originally it would have looked something like this, and now you can group it to however you want. So project and definition, definition only, etc. So I can see in here, I have 2 references. So just come in here to edit it. Do it so you all can see it. Oop. Hairstyle, sure. And then I can press F8 to go to the next reference. By the way, pro tip. And then add my other one. So things aren't going to work because I inherit my bike workout, or my bike workout class implements distance workout. So we're just going to, again, control click and just make a copy of this so that you don't have to watch me update all of the bike workout ones too. So we'll just kill the hair, which is how I feel every morning. But, you know, it's still there. All right. And so live unit testing again, now that I've added this parameter, updated constructors, etc., figured out which tests to run, ran them for me, and again, is letting me know that everything is green with these checks inside the editor. So again, I didn't have to lose the context of my development at all to know that my change was successful. All right, so now let's go back in here. And you may have noticed in this file that there are these like gray dots, which a lot of people think these are smudges and like problems with our WPF rendering. It's on purpose. So these are code suggestions, which are ways to hint to developers alternate coding patterns or like best practices for them to use. So if I investigate this one with Control Dot, you'll see that it's telling me to use the explicit type instead of var, which you might be like, what? Hold up. Which I know from my code style talk yesterday, actually you all do prefer var more than the explicit type, so woo, yay Netherlands. And so this is part of our new code style configuration and enforcement inside Visual Studio 2017. So you can either configure your local settings on your machine by going to Tools, Options, and then you'll see in here C# Code Style General. We also have it for Visual Basic. And you can choose how you want to enforce your code style. So you can see here, I prefer the explicit type for var, and if I violate that, then it's going to mark it as a suggestion and tell me I should switch it to the explicit type. This only works on your machine, though, so if you want to enforce it across your whole team, that's not possible with Tools Options, which is why we've extended the editor config file format. If you know that, it's an open source file format that works across many editors for defining tabs for spaces, your indent size, etc. And so we worked with that community to extend it to now work for .NET Code Style. And so you can see in here that now I've codified my conventions in this text file, and they're enforced in the editor. And this editor config file basically supplants what's in tools options, so it will override those settings. So that's all great and dandy, except you'll notice that, for instance, in my test project, I don't care if you use var at all. Like, whew, if you write test, you're fine by me. So we actually want to change the code style in this project from the other one. So right now I have madsk's editor config extension built in, which everything works without the extension built in. It just makes it easier to add editor config files and edit them if you have it. It just provides colorization and little tricks like this, like add editor config file directly. And so if I add this, wrong thing on, let's copy this. All right, and so now I can say, hey, let's actually prefer var in here. And then I can go the step further, and rather than making a suggestion, I can say I don't want any notification or like decoration inside the editor to let me know one way or the other if I should use var or not. And so none is kind of like a silent enforcement where it doesn't really matter which one you use, but if you do like extract a method or if you introduce a local variable, we will use that setting in that code generation that we do. So if you edit an editor config file, you do currently have to close all the documents for those changes to take effect. But now if I just use, again, go to all to quickly open files. Oh no. And then we want it to be on athlete. Then you'll notice, again, in my athlete class, which I wanted, var has the suggestion to use the explicit type. But if I go to my test class, you'll see there's nothing there. And so now you can have different code preferences across your projects with editor config. So let's go back to that tweet helpers class. And so what's an example of like a best practice that we can suggest to people? Well, one of them is from fxcop. So if you know what fxcop is, maybe it's not going to work. Maybe I killed it. No. Is everything static? Everything's static. Well, we did take a lot of the fxcop rules and we rewrote them, the top 100, into Roslyn analyzers and provided code fixes where possible. It's an extension in the Microsoft Gallery called Microsoft Code Analysis 2017 or something really boring like that. And what that does is it just enforces things. So what this should be saying is make this class static because that's what's recommended here. So that I don't accidentally instantiate it because I have all static members. And so there's other best practices like that in there to help you with performance and other ways to use .NET securely and things like that. Also, in editor config, I forgot to mention that you can enforce both naming conventions and formatting rules. So you can have spacing settings, new line settings, wrapping settings, and then you can also write your own naming conventions in here as well. Which is, for example, why you're seeing my hashtags being commented or marked because I'm not following my team's coding conventions with naming there. Great. Last thing, you may have noticed when I did control dot that this is telling me I should move my type to a file with the same name, which is because if I hover over these indent guides or structure visualizers, which you'll see here, which again, if you're, can you see that? Yeah. If you're a Productivity Power Tools user, these are from Productivity Power Tools, I can now see that I also have a class athlete in here without having to scroll. And so I want to move all my types to a file with the same name, and so I can press control dot to then move them. Oh, and the last thing, you're noticing this huge chunk of faded out code. We now fade out unreachable codes, so you can immediately see that this is essentially dead. And so I can just control dot and remove it. Cool. All right, any questions on anything we just saw with productivity tricks in Visual Studio 2017? Can't really see you guys. I'm assuming no. All right, next. So what did we just see? Basically, our goal of Visual Studio 2017 is to help you write better code faster. So we do that by adding more refactorings and quick fixes, improving navigation. So you saw the go to all with Control-T, and final references is now colorized. And we also have Control-Click now, where you can easily go to definition with just holding Control and clicking. We have live unit testing, which is the only enterprise-only feature I showed. All the rest, even the code style, is in all SKUs of Visual Studio. But live unit testing, again, that entire time I was editing, it figured out which tests were impacted by my code change, ran them for me, and let me know in line in the editor without me losing the context of my development that all my tests were passing. Debugging, we've done a lot of stuff with debugging. I showed you the new exception helper. We also have like run to click and things like that if you want to look up the rest of the debugging stuff that we've added. We have code style enforcement. So that was the thing with the editor config. If you don't think you're going to be able to convince your team to adopt editor config, you can at least enforce it on your own machine with tools options. And then we have IntelliSense improvements. So you saw we have the highlighting inside the completion list where we like bold the item that's matching inside IntelliSense. We have the filter, so you can filter out extension methods or filter to only classes if you want. And then we do the smart variable naming, where as you're typing, we're going to help suggest names for you so that you don't have to even use the brain power at all to think of naming your variables. So what do we need to do next? So from talking to a ton of developers about what they do and how they can be more productive, apparently people don't understand LINQ as well as we thought, and they really want to be able to convert for loops to LINQ expressions, which not the LINQ query expression, but the dotted expressions. So that's something that we're going to work on next. I didn't show it, but we have a refactoring where we'll sync your file and type name. So if they become out of sync, we'll sync them for you. And now people are saying they want the same thing with folders and namespaces. So if your namespace ends up changing and your folder needs to be renamed, we'll automatically offer to do that for you. On the navigation front, people want to be able to navigate to decompiled sources. So right now we do metadata as source, but they want us to actually decompile it and show them method bodies. So that's something that we're going to work on. We did unreachable code, but now people are saying, I want to know dead code. Like, fade out all dead code because, like, no, I open XYZ developer's code and I know all this stuff is dead and I just want to get all that rot out of there. User support, blah, blah. We can read these. So the other big one is, the other two big ones are completion for types not using. So people want to, like, type like JSON dot deserialize and have all the dots work despite them not having the package installed. So that's something that we're working on. And then now that you can enforce code style everywhere, we need to make like a one button, like make my code adhere to my editor config file. And so we're going to work on that as well. If you think we're missing anything from this list, come find me, because I need to know, because we're prioritizing it now. So don't wait. Now that we have all this stuff added to Visual Studio 2017, one piece of feedback that we've heard from a lot of people in the field is now that onboarding has become a lot easier for them, because it only takes 20 minutes or less to install Visual Studio. Now you don't have to have like a OneNote somewhere or like a printed out piece of paper that you give to a new developer that has all your coding conventions on it. You can just check it into source control as an editor config file. And then when they actually clone your repo, all that like code style is enforced automatically in Visual Studio. And then now we have a ton of refactorings and stuff in the box, so you don't have to go install other extensions like productivity power tools right away to just get productive. All right, so let's get to C#7, because why not? So in this, in Visual Studio 2017, it shipped with C#7. The 15.3 version also shipped with 7.1, which I'm not going to show today. But the big thing from 7.1 that people seem most stoked about is async main. So now you can have your main method as an asynchronous method, so you can like test asynchronous code in there. All right. So the thing, as a former Python developer, the thing that I'm most stoked about in Visual Studio 2017 is tuples. So what you used to have to do today when you wanted to return multiple values from a method, you would use this tuple type, which is not actually built into the language. And so what we've actually done now in C#7 is we've built tuples in directly, and their value types as well. And so I can just delete all this, boom, and voila, I have a tuple. With tuples, you can optionally name your elements. So I can say, oh, well, this is a workout, and this is going to be the calories from that workout. And you'll notice that down here, when I actually consume my tuples, this is a tuple that I'm getting from that method above, that you access its elements with item 1, item 2, just like you did with that other tuple. But now I'm getting code suggestions here. And so we've added a ton of code suggestions inside of Visual Studio 2017 to help you learn new language features. So this one's saying, hey, you named your tuple elements, so you probably want to use those instead of item 1 and item 2. And so I can just quickly go to both of those and use that explicit tuple name instead. And now that I've done that, if you were looking closely, you'll notice that the tuple itself has a code suggestion on it. And if I investigate that, it's saying I can deconstruct my tuple. And this is into local variables instead. And this is because I never return best, like the name of my tuple. And so because I'm only ever using the tuple elements, which is calories and workout, I can just deconstruct this into locals. And so I can just do that, and this is the syntax for that. And so now I can see things got cleaned up a little bit, where instead of best.calories, it's calories. Instead of best.workout.notes, it's just workout.notes. And so again, it's just little syntax that we're trying to teach you with these code suggestions inside the editor to help you really embrace C#7. So that was tuples. The next thing that we did is pattern matching. So you'll see in this tweet, today's workout method I have, that I'm doing a lot of casting, seeing if a cast works, and if it does, then do something. And this is our current way of checking like the type of something. And so what pattern matching allows you to do is check both the type and the value of an expression. So I'm just gonna, start here. So again, we have a code suggestion, and if I investigate this, I can see that it's telling me to use pattern matching. And if you look at the little code preview that we pop up, you can see that we have this is expression now that's going to suggest, which basically does this cast and the null check for you. So it's saying, if today's workout is a bike workout, then call it bike. So this is a pattern right here. And so then I can reference bike later in that body, basically as a local. I can do this in other places as well. So now I have pattern matching everywhere, and so it just makes my code a little bit more readable because I'm not having to read through all the casting that I'm trying and null checking. To go the step further, we can, rather than having a bunch of ifs, make this into a switch. So I can do a switch on today's workout. And then if I grab all this and use Alt-up to just move it inside, I can now use pattern matching with a switch. And so I can just make a bunch of cases. So I can say, if it's a bike workout, call it bike and do something with it. If it's a distance workout, call it distance and return something else, etc., etc. And so I just make these all into different cases, and then I just have a default at the end. And so this is what pattern matching looks like with a switch. And so again, also, if you wanted to check the value as well. So here I'm only checking the types. If I want to say, oh, I only want to look at distance workouts if I ran further than 2 miles, then we have the when syntax. And then you can, again, use that variable that you have and say, oh, when I've run more than 2 miles. And so that's how you check both the type and the value of an expression with pattern matching. And so overall, this looks, in general, I think, way easier to read than the bunch of casting and ifs that I had scattered before. The last kind of thing I want to show is local functions. So if I go back to that tweet helpers that I had before. Let's make this full screen so you can see it. Yeah, you can see that I have a helper method here where I'm going to try to add a hashtag. So basically what I'm doing is I'm taking like my notes from my workout, and then if it's under 140 characters, which now I need to update this to the new Twitter rules, but it's going to keep on adding a hashtag until I reach my 140 character limit and then return. So that's how you tweet from a pro, right? Don't do that. But so this is just a helper method. I don't really need it to be its own separate thing. I can actually now with local functions just move this inside of the primary method, kill the accessibility part of it. And then I can now remove these parameters because now they're in scope of my local function. And then now I have a local function. And note that you can put them after the return statement, even though they're a local variable. And the reason that you would use a local function over like a lambda is, one, it's more readable by actually giving it a name and having it look just like a method. Two, you can put it after the return statement. And three, it's less allocations because it's not actually like a delegate behind the scenes. So that's local functions for you. And that's all I'm going to show with C#7. I wasn't able to get nullable reference types, my demo working for that, for C#8, but you should look that up if you don't know what that is, because it's pretty cool stuff that's coming up. So again, what I just showed was tuples, which allow you to return multiple items from a method. Pattern matching, which allows you to check both the type and the value of expressions, and then local functions, which let you nest your helpers if you only ever call them from one method inside that method to reduce the number of allocations and to make your code more readable. So I showed a ton of stuff in here. Here are a lot of resources to help you learn all the keyboard shortcuts, to be more productive. If you're interested in the editor config or you want to know what all those refactorings are, I'm working on documenting all of them. So I've documented most of the refactorings. There's some stuff in like 15.3, 15.5 that I haven't gotten to yet. And then editor config and all that stuff is up there as well. And with that, I think I'm done. So if you have any questions, I can take them now, if anyone has any. No, no question? Yep. So the question is there a way to take those like if statements that had pattern matching and automatically put them into a switch? We do not have that yet, but you could write it. You know, anyone can write it now. We accept PRs on the Roslyn GitHub. Does anyone else have a question? Yeah, and so if you are interested in learning how to write your own Roslyn analyzer, which an analyzer is just what, it finds a place in your code where you're like not doing something that you want, it'll put the squiggler in there and offer to add the fix for you. And Bart is giving a talk on that in like an hour, I think, hour and a half in this room. And so that'll be a great way to learn how to do that and how actually pretty easy it is as well. All right, with that, thank you for coming out. If you have any questions, find me. I'll be here the rest of the day.